Clients don't. They've never asked that. Not one person has ever asked that. They want to know, what can you do for me? How quickly can you do it? And what's it going to cost? And what I'm going to do now, I'm really had a personal tragedy. I'm rebuilding up my business. And as I do so, if I build, instead of turning away business, this time I will just raise my fees. And that's what I think a lot of people like me have done in this kind of role. So it's almost like a trailer for the fantastic movie. And so that's all I ever need is one chance. And that's how I built my business. One time, one speaking, and then when they always wanted more. Everybody's always wanted more. So that's all I need.
Welcome back to the SaaS Playbook, the show where we sit down with founders and B2B leaders who are actually in the trenches building something real and talk about the decisions, the pivots, and the strategies behind their growth. This episode is brought to you by Hera Digital. If your pipeline looks busy but your revenue doesn't match, I'm an engine and somebody will reach out to you. Today, I'm joined by the lovely Hilary Fordwich, founder of Strelmark and one of the most experienced business development strategists we've ever come across. Hilary was head of global BD at KPMG, got headhunted to lead BD for a global systems integration firm, and then went to build her own consultancy that's been running now for well over 24 years. She's also a regular correspondent on Sky News Australia, funnily enough, but Newsmax and GB News, and she's no stranger to being on camera with beautiful hair. Hilary, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jenny, for that smashing introduction. Really lovely of you.
Your accolades are that long that if I listed any more of them, would be here for the next 20 minutes. So I think it would be that's perfect segue to sort of unpack all of that slowly. But we're sort of really interested in focusing on your BD leadership and sort of transitioning that down to Strelmark and starting that from scratch. As we know, running someone else's business, but running your own business are two very different beasts. But what was the moment where you decided the corporate path wasn't the right thing for you anymore and you felt like you needed to build something of your own?
Well, actually, it was for a very personal reason. And I think a lot of our listeners and viewers probably have the same thing. People want to have a family as well. They're not just a working machine. And at the time, you mentioned that I had headed global business development for KPMG worldwide, which I had. And I'd married, that was based in Amsterdam. I'd married a Dutchman and I had 2 young children. And then I wanted another child. And when I was pregnant with that child, it was my mommy at the time, actually, who said, darling, you're outsourcing motherhood and you'll never buy back the childhoods of those children of yours. Because I was gallivanting around the world, traveling around the world. You mentioned I was headhunted out of KPMG and this global systems integration firm had a global development center in Manila. So when you travel to Manila, at least I was going there once every quarter for quarterly board meetings and then to meet with my team. So when you come back to the United States from Manila, you cross the international date line. So a meeting would end on a Friday and it would be Sunday night. And I didn't even see my children on the weekend. So it was a very personal reason. I remember when my 3rd child was born and I literally, and sorry if this is a bit too graphic for all the men listening too, but I was breastfeeding him and I literally was moving him from one breast to the other breast, making a list of what were just the bills I had to pay to be in town. I thought it was very important just to be in the same country because then I could at least see my children. That was the geographical proximity. So what I did is I leveraged my network and I waited until I had one major client to go out with. And that's when I founded my company. So for personal reasons, to make sure I had the geographical proximity just to at least see my children and be in the same country.
I think that just sort of really touches on the nature of being an entrepreneur as well as being a mother. And I think maybe it's not really spoken about enough when we look at scaling businesses and or creating businesses where it actually, we're doing this for longevity, right? But sometimes that comes with a lot of sacrifice. And I think those years prior to you starting Strelmark was your sacrifice in order to move forward to get to a point where you're like, okay, this is enough. I need to spend time with my kids. But also, I think it's just sort of not really spoken about well enough when it comes down to women in entrepreneurship. So thank you for bringing up that perspective. And whether that's personal or not, but I think it's every story is beautiful where it starts, and then it depends where it ends as well. You've said before that everything you teach comes from either your time at KPMG or from what you've seen working inside client businesses by data, never just opinion. But how did that approach set you apart early on when you were competing against people who were just selling ideas?
Well, that's a very good question, Jenny. What I've learned is that at least when I was at KPMG, and then also with all my client work, I was always back in the day, the only woman in the room. And what I've learned about men in particular, and I think this is all sensible business people, they want facts and data. For don't say, well, everybody thinks. Don't say everybody, because first of all, nothing is really, that's like an absolute. Say 73.5% of people according to, and give them the source. And then everybody's all ears. I needed to prove that I was credible. And the way to be credible was I came to every single meeting with some data to back up what I was saying, what I was advocating, what I was proposing. I had done my research, and then you get respect. I didn't have any problems with getting the respect. And I was always promoted actually every 2 years during those 14 years. And I think it was because there was a partner somewhere with more power and more budget that wanted all of this with him. And that's what I advocate when I'm coaching and training. I always say, don't say something off the top of your head, but if you have an inkling and an instinct for something, or you think you've seen something, go and find the data, the research, quote the source and quote the exact number, because then you have credibility. And when I'm delivering my training, it goes for men and women. I think sensible business, smart people, particularly left brain, brilliant people, they want to know this is grounded. This has some real facts behind it, so I can believe in what Hilary's saying. So yes, you're right. Everything I coach and train comes from one or two places. Either that from being in business, KPMG and all my clients for the last 24 years, and then I research the facts behind it and the data behind it. Or sometimes, being the total nerd I am, I'm doing that research and I see something else that's successful. And then I want to find a real life example, because it's one thing to find facts and data, but people like to hear, I believe, real life examples, because then it personalizes it. It makes it authentic to their situation.
I think I would love to add to that as well. Being from a BD background as a female as well, Hilary, I would agree. There is very different tactics and different language when you speak to male and female, because we see things differently, and that's just the nature. Now, you mentioned as well there that I wanted to touch on is the fact that it generally comes from experiences and facts and data and statistics, but it always is delivered better if it comes from a story, a personal story. So if you think about it, BDs or successful BDs are very good storytellers. If you've noticed the level in which we engage and in which we can actually take a prospect or somebody, a lead, all the way from not knowing who you are, what you do, all the way down to holding their hand to onboarding. That's really a story within itself. But would you agree?
Well, actually, I don't think any client or any prospect in 24 years has ever asked anything about a personal story. They don't care. What they care about is they care about themselves. So when people tell stories about something else which isn't about them, they don't care. What they want to know is what you can do for me, how can you make me successful, and what's relevant to me. That's what they care about. Always, 100%. No one ever said to me, you're the first, obviously, podcast. They'll ask, Hilary, how did you get started? Clients don't. They've never asked that. Not one person has ever asked that. They want to know, what can you do for me? How quickly can you do it? And what's it going to cost? About the person that delivers. They don't want to know stories. They want to know, what can you deliver? How much does it cost? And how quickly can you achieve it?
In simple terms, yeah. So now BD is as a function hasn't really changed a lot in the past decade, 2 decades, maybe a little bit now with the inception of AI, but essentially the BD work itself has not changed. With how relationships get built and now versus maybe 15, 20 years ago, what's the biggest shift you've now seen in how companies actually win business today compared to when you first started, young Hilary?
Well, the only real difference, actually, you're right, it's really stayed consistent. The only real discipline behind it is the automation behind it in terms of the CRM systems of keeping track. But one of the principles I've always said to every leader I ever meet with, all it is, you've got to remember, is the pencil and paper automated. So the actual relationship building part, the actual work behind it, what your people need to do is still the same. And if they're not coached on how to gain and retain clients, and by the way, my tagline is how to gain and retain clients. The reason I have the retain there is it's just as important to retain a client. If you don't retain a client, they have dumped you, they have left you, and that is very, very bad for your business. And so I think too many companies, especially professional service firms, put a lot of effort into gaining new clients, but you've got to retain what you have. And the principles behind that have remained exactly the same. It's the automation, the CRM systems, of keeping track of things that have really, that's the biggest difference I've seen over these last 20 years.
Yeah. I also agree with the churn component, and 100% agree. We speak to founders on a daily basis, and 9 times out of 10, everyone's always focused on getting more. But if you really take a step back and realize there's no point getting more if you can't keep the ones that you already have, right?
Exactly.
And that's really what makes a growth trajectory. So I really love that that's your tagline, because it's really actually simple but important. Now, you've described your model as essentially being the person in the room. Clients want you specifically. not a team that you've trained, but how have you navigated that tension between being the product and trying to scale?
I have had that. Actually, I did try to scale because there was a time when I was turning away so much business. I brought in other people that I thought was wonderful. In fact, there was one particular woman who was actually, I thought she was smarter than me. I thought she was better than me. Gave her a client engagement and they were so disappointed. I had to go back in and rectify it. Somebody once told me, Hilary, you have the ability to tell someone their baby's really ugly. They still like you when you're leaving, and they'd even give you a hug when you left the room. Whereas this woman that I brought in that I think was much smarter than me, and I thought she was better than me, for some reason, she could try to give you $100 and she would manage to alienate you. I don't know what it was about her, but the clients didn't like her. And so that was a disaster. And then I had to go in and do the work behind her. And then I tried with a man as well. I thought he was wonderful. Actually, he was a former very, very senior executive from KPMG. I thought he was fabulous. And same things happened. It didn't go well. So I've given up on that. And what I'm going to do now, I had a personal tragedy. I'm rebuilding up my business. And as I do so, if I build, instead of turning away business, this time I will just raise my fees. And that's what I think a lot of people like me have done in this kind of role. They've done that. What I also will do is backfill a lot with a bigger team behind me. Unfortunately, though, I live in a state in America where they totally and utterly disincentivize bringing on staff. You end up having to bring in just consultants because what they do to penalize you, you have employees. And now there's a lot of people that I have worked with now that are remote, that we can do remote work from different states, so that will work. And that's what I'll do. I'll build a team behind me and raise my fees this time instead.
So that the people who truly do want to work with you are here for the value and not what the price tag is. And I think that's a clever way. It comes from a place of scarcity. Not everybody can afford a piece of Hilary. Okay. So anybody's listening out there, when a company brings you in for a keynote and that turns into longer engagement, what does that ideal client typically look like for you in Strelmark? And is it a certain size of business, a certain stage, or is it more about the leader in the room recognizing they have a gap that only Hilary can fill?
Actually, it's somewhat all of the above, Jenny. Over the last 20 years, it was all of sort of the above. Generally, though, being that I'm in the government contracting arena of the greater Washington, D.C. area, the biggest clients I've had, the best clients were huge government contractors where they would have me come in to do executive coaching, leadership coaching, a lot of offsites, a lot of training of teams, a lot of BD training. And the other thing that I do a lot of is orals coaching, big presentation coaching for multi-million-dollar bids. And of course, those are mainly government contractors, although there are some global construction firms, and one in particular that I work with where I do their orals coaching. But the best kind of client for me is somebody, yes, it's got to be big because they've got a number of teams and they want me to elevate all of their people so that they can gain and retain all of their customers, all of their clients. So mainly it's government contractors, but I've worked with lawyers, accountants, architects, engineers, a lot of basically all sorts of angles of technology and technological firms, also in the healthcare industry and finance.
So what that tells me is your expertise is not industry agnostic. It's whoever is looking to really significantly grow through their people.
It's industry. Exactly. It's just always professional service firms. I've actually never worked in a product arena. That's not something I'm familiar with. My expertise is just professional service firms. And you're right, industry agnostic. I worked horizontally across all professional service firms.
And I just wanted to quickly touch on the level of growth that you're experiencing. You did touch on it earlier, but I want to dive in a little deeper. You've talked about wanting to build on the keynote side and into something much bigger, much grander. It's getting to a point where you are booked months in advance and at a completely different price point. But what does that path actually look like for you right now, and what needs to happen for you to get there?
Well, every time I'm booked for a keynote, there's always been a line of people afterwards wanting me to work for them. So it's booking keynotes at conferences and or companies just wanting me to come and speak at if they give me one chance to speak, just one chance, my role is to make their people want me. So it's almost like a trailer for the fantastic movie. And so that's all I ever need is one chance. And that's how I built my business. One time, one speaking. And then when they always wanted more, everybody's always wanted more. So that's all I need.
If it works, if it's not broke, don't fix it is a typical Australian saying.
That's very good. Very apropos.
Hilary, now this is what the last question for you as we wrap up, but you once had a client tell you to triple your fees and write the book. And if you could sit down with a founder or a consultant who's undercharging and over delivering, what's the one thing you'd want them to hear?
That it is true. You need to write a book. I've got one in the works, but I'm not going to go forward until I know I can make it a bestseller, because there needs to be a whole machine around that. It is to make sure that whatever you're delivering, they want more of it. As long as you don't have, then you don't have to sell. I've never really had to sell. If I deliver really, really well, and they want more. And I practice what I preach. My whole consulting, all my coaching is about being wanted. How do you make sure it's not just a need, that you are wanted? And that's delivering a phenomenal product. So my advice to everybody is, whatever you do, it must be absolutely top notch so that people want more of it.
Hillary, I think honestly I could talk to you for another 3 hours, but you're expensive and we can't afford that. So I will let you get back to your very full calendar. But if you want to learn more about Hillary's work, check out Strelmark, check out the work she's been doing on GB News. If you find her, she's everywhere. So please do drop her a line. And if your business needs help building sales engines that actually converts, drop the word engine again. In the meantime, keep building meaningfully. But thank you for joining us today, Hillary.
But Jenny, thank you for having me. Really appreciate it.